In the heart of Catholic Germany, in the state of Bavaria, was born a young woman whose life would become synonymous with mystery, faith, and tragedy. Her name was Anneliese Michel, and her real story shocked the world when it was later turned into a film. Anneliese Maria Katharina Michel was born on September 21, 1952, in Dillingen and der Donau, located in southwestern Germany. She grew up in a deeply religious environment, surrounded by Catholic traditions that shaped much of her worldview. From an early age, she showed herself to be a sensitive, kind, and deeply devoted child. She attended Mass regularly, made regular confessions, and had a close relationship with local priests. Her family was simple but very religious. Her parents, Josefa and Alois Michel, were devout Catholics who raised their children within the teachings of the Church, respecting the sacraments and traditional morality. However, during her adolescence, something began to change in her. Strange symptoms started to appear: sudden seizures, unconsciousness without any apparent reason, and even violent and inexplicable behavior. The first episodes began when Anneliese was about 16 years old. She suffered convulsions, lost consciousness unexpectedly, and seemed to have uncontrollable and terrifying moments. At first, doctors suspected epilepsy or some neurological disorder. She underwent several exams, took medication, but the symptoms persisted, and at times even worsened. Over time, she began to report disturbing experiences. She said she saw terrible images, felt repulsive smells that no one else could sense, and heard voices constantly harassing her. These voices, according to her, spoke cruelly, saying things like, "God doesn't love you," "You will go to hell," and "There is no salvation for you." They were manipulative words that corroded her mind and soul. At home, her family watched helplessly as these transformations occurred. Sometimes, she seemed normal. Other times, she acted completely altered, tearing clothes, refusing food, and attacking objects violently. For Anneliese's parents, these events went beyond medical understanding. They firmly believed that their daughter was possessed by evil spirits. It was then that they turned to the church for spiritual help. They knew a local priest named Ernst Alt, known for his religious zeal and for having dealt with unusual cases. Father Alt visited the family and spoke directly with Anneliese. He listened carefully to her descriptions, observed her behavior, and came to an astonishing conclusion: this could be demonic possession. He reported feeling a heavy and oppressive atmosphere inside the family's house. He said that Anneliese exhibited classic signs associated with historical cases of possession, such as aversion to the host and holy water, and above-normal physical strength. With that, the darkest journey of Anneliese Michel's life began. A journey that would involve exorcisms, intense physical and mental suffering, and a tragic ending that shook Germany and the world. The first strange signs appeared around 1968, when Anneliese was only 16 years old. During a class at school, she suddenly collapsed to the ground, having a mysterious collapse that caught everyone's attention. Rushed urgently to the hospital, she underwent a series of neurological exams. The doctors found some abnormalities, but nothing indicating a serious or incurable disease. Despite this, the symptoms continued. Episodes of fainting, screaming in the middle of the night, and involuntary movements became frequent. Many times, Anneliese seemed conscious, but unable to control her body. Her worried parents, without a satisfactory medical answer, sought alternatives outside science. They began attending church more frequently, prayed before sacred images, and asked for specific prayers for their daughter. At home, relatives noticed that certain objects seemed to move on their own when Anneliese was nearby. Cups fell from shelves, lights flickered without any apparent reason, and there was a constant smell of sulfur in her room. She herself told that she saw human figures with empty stares leaning against her closet. Other times, she said she heard low laughter coming from empty places. One of the most disturbing moments happened during a visit to the local cemetery. As she passed in front of a specific grave, Anneliese fell to her knees and began screaming that a wicked person was buried there, someone who was haunting her. This incident left everyone in shock. How could she know that? It was something inexplicable beyond reason. Over time, the symptoms intensified. She began to suffer from severe abdominal pain, inexplicable vomiting, and even bruises that appeared out of nowhere. Once, during a medical consultation, Anneliese ripped the doctor's gloves off and tore them with her teeth while speaking unfamiliar Latin words, a language she had never formally learned. The doctors were stunned. Some believed it was psychosis or schizophrenia, others thought it might be a dissociative disorder or even a conscious simulation. But the parents insisted something supernatural was happening to their daughter. They remembered that since childhood, Anneliese had always shown sensitivity to perceive presences that were invisible. Decided to seek a spiritual answer, they scheduled a meeting with Father Alt, who, after hearing the complete testimony of the family, decided to conduct an experiment. During a visit to the Michel house, he brought a consecrated host and approached Anneliese with it. In front of the astonished eyes of everyone present, she began to scream, thrash around, and cry compulsively. The priest left the house with a serious expression and said a sentence that would mark the fate of that young woman. She needs an exorcism. After the encounter between Anneliese Michel and Father Ernst Alt, the family decided they needed stronger intervention, something beyond household prayers and blessings. They were convinced that the girl was under demonic influence and now sought an official exorcism. But there was a problem. In Germany at that time, exorcisms were extremely rare and generally seen as medieval practices. The Catholic Church did not easily authorize this type of ritual, especially in cases that could be resolved with medical or psychiatric help. Even so, Father Alt decided to intervene. He contacted the local ecclesiastical authorities, presenting detailed reports about Anneliese's strange behavior, including her physical crises, aversion to sacred objects, and the voices she claimed to hear. Alt insisted that this went beyond any known medical diagnosis. He mentioned that the girl seemed to possess extraordinary strength at times and spoke languages she had never learned, including classical Latin and ancient Greek. Despite the skepticism of the religious superiors, he managed to schedule a meeting with the local bishop to discuss the case. He brought written testimonies, short videos, which were rare at the time, and even audio recordings of Anneliese's screams. The bishop, skeptical but attentive, analyzed all the documents and decided to send a specialist in unusual religious phenomena. This specialist was Father Walter Puriker, an experienced man who had studied strange religious phenomena. Father Puriker visited the Michel family's home and spoke directly with Anneliese. He was impressed by her physical and emotional condition and noted that many of the symptoms matched historical descriptions of demonic possessions. During the visit, he asked Anneliese who she thought was tormenting her. She answered without hesitation, "It's Lucifer, and there's also Beelzebub and Satan." These statements, coming from a simple and God-fearing young woman, left the priest speechless. He asked for time to reflect and consulted other priests in the diocese. He also reviewed the Rituale Romanum, the Catholic book containing the official exorcism rite, to see if there was enough theological basis to perform the ritual. By mid-1970, after months of analysis and discussion within the local religious hierarchy, the final response came. The exorcism would be authorized, but only after a series of strict conditions were met. Among the conditions, it was required that Anneliese continue to be accompanied by medical professionals, that her parents sign responsibility forms, and that the rituals be performed by 2 trained priests. In addition, the exorcisms should take place in a controlled and private environment, away from public and media eyes, to avoid sensationalism. For the Michel family, this decision was like a light at the end of the tunnel. They believed that, finally, Anneliese's liberation was near. The preparations began immediately. Dates were set, sacred materials were gathered, such as holy water, consecrated hosts, incense, and Latin Bibles, and a chapel near the city of Klingenberg am Main was chosen as the location for the rituals. Thus, in June 1975, the official exorcism process began, which would last more than a year, marking German history and generating ethical, religious, and scientific debates that would last for decades. With everything prepared, the official exorcisms began in a small chapel located near the city of Klingenberg am Main, in rural Bavaria. Each session was conducted by Fathers Ernst Alt and Walter Puriker, both trained in traditional Catholic rituals. The Rituale Romanum was followed meticulously. Biblical readings in Latin, use of holy water, incense, consecrated hosts, and direct invocations to angels and protective saints. At first, Anneliese seemed to respond well to the ritual. When the priests recited the prayers, she calmed down for a few minutes and even smiled shyly. However, as the exorcisms repeated, her behavior began to change radically. She started having violent reactions during the rituals, screaming obscenities, tearing clothes, and throwing herself against walls. The priests noticed that when they used holy water, Anneliese let out sharp screams, as if she were feeling physical pain. Her skin even smoked in some spots, according to witnesses' reports. One of the most shocking moments happened during the fourth exorcism, when Anneliese, without any apparent stimulus, stood up alone and walked backward to the altar, where she spat on the host. She claimed she was unable to control these actions, saying that the demons, forced her to do so. She called herself the servant of hell and said God had abandoned her. The sessions were recorded on cassette tapes for later analysis. On these recordings, overlapping voices were heard along with Anneliese's. Some deep, others whispering, all in different languages. One of them, in particular, caught the attention of religious researchers. A female voice speaking in ancient Greek saying, "We are many." This phrase echoed biblical accounts of the episode of Jesus expelling demons from a possessed man. As the months passed, Anneliese's body began to show signs of extreme physical exhaustion. She rapidly lost weight, had unexplained bruises, and often bled from her nose and mouth. Her parents, although distressed, maintained unwavering faith that the exorcisms would free her. The priests also believed they were close to expelling the evil entities. But something strange began to happen. The more the exorcisms were performed, the worse Anneliese got. Her crises increased in intensity and duration, and she began sleeping less than 2 hours per night. Doctors who followed her warned that the young woman was at serious risk of death due to malnutrition and dehydration. Even so, the parents and priests decided to continue, believing that evil had not yet been completely defeated. It was the beginning of a tragic ending that no one expected, and that would soon shake all of Germany and the religious world. As the exorcisms became increasingly frequent, some weeks had 3 sessions. Anneliese's body began to show clear signs of extreme exhaustion. She lost weight drastically, losing over 10 kilograms in just a few months. Her skin became pale, her eyes sunken, and her hands trembled constantly, even in relatively calm moments. The young woman began to reject food and drink for long periods, saying, the devil wouldn't let her. In some days, she drank only a glass of water and 8 crumbs of bread. Her parents, although deeply religious, became alarmed by their daughter's physical condition. They began to alternate between unwavering faith and cruel doubt about whether they were doing the right thing. The doctors who had been following the case for months warned that Anneliese was at serious risk of death from malnutrition and dehydration. One of them suggested immediate hospitalization, but the parents refused, believing that the evil still had not been expelled. During the nights, Anneliese suffered violent attacks. She screamed incomprehensible words, threw herself against walls, and in some cases, scratched her own face until it bled. Witnesses to these scenes described that it seemed as if an invisible force was inside her, as if something was holding or moving her against her will. On one occasion, she pulled the crucifix off the wall and threw it to the ground, shouting, "I don't want to pray anymore. I don't want God anymore." Words that shocked even the most experienced priests. Despite this, she maintained moments of lucidity. In those moments, she apologized to her parents and the priests, saying that she knew she didn't want to say those things, but that they forced her to. One of the saddest parts of the story is that Anneliese never completely lost self-awareness. Even possessed, she felt shame for her actions and cried compulsively after each crisis. Her family and friends noticed that she began to avoid mirrors, claiming she saw distorted reflections of people who did not exist. At night, she said that Lucifer appeared before her and threatened her. The psychological pressure was so great that she developed wounds in her mouth and throat due to constant screaming and lack of hydration. Father Alt tried to remain calm and faithful, but confessed in personal notes that he feared for Anneliese's life. He wrote, "She seems to be being consumed by something beyond our understanding. Even so, everyone continued the rituals, convinced that liberation was near. But, over time, a silent question began to arise in everyone's minds. And if the exorcisms were causing more harm than good? This would be the beginning of a moral and religious debate that would persist long after Anneliese Michel's death. With the exorcisms continuing to be performed frequently, some weeks even had 3 sessions, Anneliese's body began to show signs of total breakdown. She became a shadow of who she once was. The devout, lively young Catholic girl full of life was now being crushed by an invisible weight that seemed to consume every particle of her existence. She barely spoke during moments of lucidity. When she did, her eyes showed deep sadness and despair. She said she felt abandoned by everyone, including God. Her body was extremely weakened. She had become so thin that her bones were visible under pale, dry skin. At one point, she weighed less than 35 kilograms, according to later medical reports. The exorcisms continued to be conducted with frequency, but now they were more intense and lasted for hours. The sessions could last up to 6 hours straight, with Anneliese screaming, thrashing about, and crying compulsively. During one of these sessions, she started repeating over and over again, "I am damned! I am damned!" in a low, broken voice. No one could make her stop, not even the priests. Her speech began to distort. Sometimes, she pronounced words with a strange, deep voice, as if someone else were speaking through her. These moments were recorded by the priests for later analysis. In some audio recordings, overlapping voices can be heard along with hers, some high-pitched, others deep, in languages no one present understood. One of the most frightening sounds was a guttural laugh coming from her throat without any apparent reason. Anneliese also began to suffer partial loss of vision and hearing. She constantly complained of chest and head pain, along with a terrible pressure sensation in her lungs, as if she were suffocating. Despite repeated medical warnings, her parents insisted on maintaining the strict religious regimen. They believed that if they stopped now, all the progress made would be lost and Anneliese would never return to normal. Father Alt, although still convinced of the necessity of the exorcisms, began to show signs of fatigue and doubt. In personal notes, he wrote, "She doesn't seem to be getting better. Maybe we are fighting something much bigger than we imagined." Father Puriker, on the other hand, maintained unwavering faith, but admitted in private conversations that he had never seen such an intense case. He said Anneliese was a unique case in modern possession history. Meanwhile, local authorities began investigating whether there was medical neglect on the part of the family and the priests. Anonymous complaints from concerned neighbors started to appear. A nurse who visited the house once reported to the police that she found Anneliese tied to a chair, with bruises on her legs and arms. She said the young woman was dehydrated and shaking violently. Even so, the parents denied any accusations. They claimed the ropes were only used to protect her during the most violent attacks and that everything was part of the necessary spiritual process. But as the days passed, a sad reality became evident. Anneliese Michel was dying, and no one could tell whether it was the power of evil or the hands of those trying to save her. In early 1976, Anneliese Michel was in a completely unrecognizable physical and mental state. Her body looked like an empty shell. Her mind oscillated between brief moments of clarity and violent attacks that left her exhausted. She could barely sit for more than a few minutes. Her muscle strength was almost entirely compromised, and she only moved with the help of her parents or caregivers. The exorcisms continued to be performed, but now less frequently, not by choice of the priests or the family, but because of the young woman's extreme fragility. During a session in February, Anneliese fainted in the middle of the ritual and was found with weak breathing and an irregular pulse. The priests had to interrupt the rite so she could be revived. This incident set off all the alarms. Even the most convinced of the spiritual necessity began to question whether this was still possible, or even morally acceptable. A local doctor, who had tried numerous times to convince the family to hospitalize Anneliese, publicly stated, This young woman is dying of starvation and exhaustion. She needs a hospital, not an exorcism. But the parents, firm in their faith, refused any medical intervention beyond the basics. They said Anneliese's soul was not yet free and that if they stopped now, everything would be lost. The young woman, in the rare moments when she spoke consciously, asked for water and food, but soon after said they would not allow her to eat. She even vomited when she tried to swallow anything. In March 1976, she suffered a severe nosebleed during the night. She bled so much that the walls and floor of her room were stained. It was necessary to clean the room several times that same week. By mid-April, she began showing clear signs of kidney failure. She hadn't urinated in days and complained of terrible abdominal pain. Her tongue was swollen and dry, and her eyes appeared dull. Even so, the religious rituals continued. Priests visited the house daily, prayed by her side, read Bible passages, and recited protection prayers. One of the last things Anneliese said consciously was, "I will die, and I will go to hell," words that deeply shocked her family and the priests present. She cried quietly while saying this, as if she knew her end was near, but felt condemned to a fate from which she could not escape. In the final days of her life, she slept practically all the time. When she woke up, she had such strong crises that she needed to be tied to the bed to avoid seriously hurting herself. It was evident to everyone that Anneliese was reaching the maximum limit of human resistance. Some thought she was fighting against something invisible. Others believed they simply hadn't done enough to save her. In the early morning of July 1, 1976, in Klingenberg am Main, Germany, Anneliese Michel took her last breath. She was only 23 years old and had spent the last months in an extremely weakened physical and mental state. She was lying in her bed, surrounded by her parents and some close relatives. Priests Alt and Puriker were also present, quietly praying by her side in the final moments. Her body no longer responded to stimuli anymore. She barely breathed, and when she did, it was with visible and painful effort. According to accounts from those present, before she died, Anneliese supposedly said, in an almost inaudible voice, "I'm going, I will see my angels." Those words brought brief relief to the family, as if she had found some kind of peace at the end. The official cause of death was recorded as severe nutritional deficiency and extreme dehydration, worsened by kidney and heart complications. In other words, Anneliese died of hunger and thirst after months without proper nutrition. For many, it was a case of medical and religious negligence. For others, it was a spiritual tragedy that showed the power of darkness over human beings. Anneliese's body was prepared for the funeral within local Catholic traditions. She was dressed in white clothes, symbolizing purity, and a crown of flowers was placed on her head. Her funeral took place 3 days later in the local cemetery. Many neighbors attended, some moved by faith, others by curiosity or respect for the family. During the ceremony, Father Alt delivered emotional words, saying that Anneliese had been an instrument of trial and witness of faith. He stated that despite the pain, she fought until the end against something no one could see, but that everyone felt. Some parishioners left candles and flowers at her grave. Others simply stood in silence, reflecting on what really happened to her. Days after the burial, strange stories began to circulate about the place where Anneliese was buried. Residents reported that on certain nights, they heard voices coming from the cemetery, muffled screams, whispering laughter, and even Latin words. One nighttime visitor claimed to have seen strange lights above the grave. Another said he felt an intense cold while passing near the tomb, even in the middle of summer. These reports were ignored by religious and scientific authorities, but quickly spread among locals and even international media. The case of Anneliese Michel, though physically concluded, seemed to have taken on a life of its own. Her story had not ended with her death, it had only changed form. And in the years that followed, this dark legacy would be revisited by filmmakers, journalists, theologians, and researchers around the world, turning Anneliese into one of the most famous and debated cases of demonic possession in modern history. Anneliese Michel's death did not go unnoticed. It quickly became an internationally known case, sparking debates about religion, mental health, and the limits between faith and negligence. In 1978, 2 years after her death, her parents, Alois and Josefa Michel, along with priests Ernst Alt and Walter Puriker, were charged with negligent homicide, that is, unintentional killing due to omission of essential care. The trial was long and controversial. For months, doctors, theologians, neighbors, and experts testified about what truly happened in that house in Klingenberg am Main. The defense lawyers argued that the family acted guided by faith and the instructions of the priests, genuinely believing they were helping Anneliese free herself from supernatural forces. On the other hand, the prosecution presented medical reports clearly showing that Anneliese suffered from refractory epilepsy and possibly a psychotic disorder, conditions that could have been treated with medication and professional monitoring. In 1978, the court decided. The parents and the 2 priests were sentenced to 6 months in prison with conditional suspension. They did not serve actual jail time, but the case set legal precedent regarding the limits of religious freedom in the country. The case also reignited an old debate within the Catholic Church. How far can faith go when confronted with science? Should religious rituals take precedence over medical assistance? In Germany, the number of requests for exorcism dropped drastically in the following years. Many bishops reevaluated protocols and required greater medical supervision before authorizing any such ritual. But at the same time, Anneliese Michel became a tragic icon among traditional religious groups and followers of paranormal phenomena. Some believe she was a true victim of demonic possession. Others believe she was a victim of ignorance and religious fanaticism. Her story inspired numerous films, books, and documentaries. The most famous is The Exorcism of Emily Rose, released in 2005, loosely based on her case. The film mixed real elements with fiction, achieving worldwide success. Even decades later, Anneliese's grave still receives visits. Some people leave candles, others leave letters asking for spiritual protection. There are those who say that, on the quietest nights, whispers can still be heard near her tombstone. For many, Anneliese was just a young woman with undiagnosed and poorly treated mental illness. For others, she lived a spiritual battle as real as the physical one, a battle from which she did not survive. Whether possession or simply mental illness, one thing is certain. Her story touches the human imagination, deeply affecting those who seek answers about good and evil, reason and faith. And you, what do you think? Was it demonic possession or simply mental illness? Leave your opinion in the comments below. We want to know what you think about this complex and human case. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more real stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell to receive notifications of new videos. We have many more intriguing, mysterious, and real cases to share with you. If you like this video about the real case of Anneliese Michel, don't forget to interact with us. Like the video if this story touched you. Share it with someone who enjoys supernatural themes and real stories. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to never miss a new video. And of course, leave a comment. We want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Anneliese was possessed? Or was it just mental illness? See you in the next video.